thank you very much for joining us this evening. This is part of what's turned into an increasingly regular online support program that we've been running at Berks and Bucks under the banner of BBFA support. During the season, it becomes a monthly kind of governance webinar where we'll take one of the key bits of FA regulations and programs and delve into it in a bit more detail, try and provide a bit of an explanation around the regs underpinning it, and then a bit of practical support as well. Given the time of year, I felt it'd be quite useful just to do a recap of the player registration process so that we're able to kind of solve some of those queries that may be coming up as you begin preparing for the new season. Hoping that this will only take about 40 to 45 minutes this evening. I've stripped it back compared to one we did about probably this time last year, or maybe around November of last year, where we went into a bit more detail around player recruitment. But I just wanted to make sure this was hopefully famous last words for those of you who know how much I will talk, but a short and snappy introduction to player registration. Just before we get started, hopefully everybody's on mute. Throughout the evening, or throughout the session, if you did want to ask a question, by all means, please feel free to drop it in the chat or use the electronic hand raise function, and I'll keep an eye on that and kind of come over to you, ask you to unmute yourself, and you're more than welcome to throw anything at me. We will finish on a general Q&A session, but by all means, if there's something that comes up, is a burning question as we go through, please feel free to jump in and ask it. So, as I said before, what we're going to look at here is underlying regulations around player registrations. So we'll quickly cover notices of approaching transfers as well, just for what happens once you get into the season, once we are back up and running. And then I will do that, hopefully all important whole game demonstration, just of what that process looks like, and some of the key functions that you'll be able to find in the whole game system to hopefully make your lives easier when it comes to attaching players and keeping track of everybody that's signed for the club. So, starting us off with the underlying regulations. Apologise, it may get dry. I'll try and keep it short and snappy, as I said. So in grassroots football, we are 99.99999% of the time going to be dealing with non-contract players. It'll only be some of those clubs up around step 5 where you might be starting to actually tie players down into contracts. However, for the vast majority of what we deal with, they are non-contracted players under FA and international definitions. So what that means is that registrations will last for the current season only. So in effect, every summer, a player is eligible to re-sign for the following season with any club that they like. There's no 3, 5, 7-year contracts at play here. Unfortunately, it does mean every year player can, if they choose, go and sign for the following season with your local rivals. But part of that as well, because there are no contracts at play, is that a player can also actually be registered for multiple clubs each season playing in different leagues. And I'll come on to some of the restrictions or how that works in reality for both adult and youth players shortly. But as I said, key thing to remember is registrations will last for one season only. What that also means is that every year you will have to, unfortunately, go through that process of reallocating a player to the relevant team in the whole game system and resubmitting their registration to the league each season so that we're dealing with the most up-to-date information. And again, I'll come on to how to do that a little bit later on. In terms of player eligibility, looking at youth players in particular, a player's age group is based on their age on the 31st of August of that playing season. So it doesn't matter if I'm 35 today, turn 36 on the 1st of September, because my age at midnight on 31st of August is 35. That would be considered my playing age for that season. Now, in youth football, players are allowed to play up one age group. However, in order for a player to be allowed to play down an age group, special dispensation has to be provided by the FA. Now, traditionally, that's only been in cases where there have been medical conditions restricting a player's physical development and growth. However, over the past few years, this has been relaxed a little bit. So you are beginning to see across the FA generally a much higher focus around mental health and well-being. And there's a recognition now that actually, if let's say a child's social group is pretty much going to be based on their school age group when you think about it. So actually, if they've either been moved up a year or held back a year at school, it's probably actually much more important for that player as a human being, as a child, to be playing with their friends than what is a slight physical difference depending on their build and their size. So we're beginning to see a lot more dispensation granted around school age bandings, but again, that dispensation does have to be provided by the national FA. It's not something that we as a county or a league can approve. Now, a player must have achieved 6 years of age by the time they're allowed to play in any kind of organised fixture. So although you may well be able to assign a 5-year-old to a team in the whole game system, they're not actually permitted to play until they reach that magic number of 6 years old. Now, what that means is if they turn 6 during the course of the season, at that point, they become eligible to play in what would be considered under-7 football. So up on the screen right now, you'll be able to see kind of that breakdown of your age on the 31st of August and what eligible age groups that means you can play in. As I said, every player can play up one age group. And then once you get up to 16 years of age, you're eligible to play in open-aged football. So that means you can play in under-17s, under-18s, under-19s, under-21s, under-23s, or just open-aged football. And generally, anything that's under 19 and above will just be considered adult football, although there may well be specific restrictions for that division or for that league. As I said, dispensation required to play down an age group. Now, looking then at the impact on league registrations annually, in adult football, players can only be registered with one club within a league. You can be registered across multiple clubs that are playing in multiple leagues or on different days of the week. However, in each specific league, you can only be registered with one club at a time. If at the beginning of the season, multiple clubs submit the same registrations for the same player, priority should be given by the league to the club which submits that registration first. And once that registration has been accepted, any change of registration must then be done by a formal transfer process. What I would say here is make sure you do watch those registration deadlines. Leagues will have a set deadline, which basically a transfer window. It's normally around, for most leagues, it's normally around the end of March, after which date you wouldn't be allowed to transfer a player from another club to yourself. Equally, a lot of leagues will have minimum numbers of players that have to be registered by the start of the season, and that could be 1 or 2 weeks before the season's due to start. So again, check your local league rules and make sure you're aware of what those registrations are. Now, sometimes before a season starts, if multiple clubs have submitted registrations for the same player, a league may well agree to cancel the existing registration to allow the second club to register them. However, that is at the league's discretion, so there's no mandatory requirement that they do so. Looking at youth leagues, a lot of the same situations apply. There will still be registration deadlines, transfer deadlines, requirements around minimum numbers of players that have to be registered before the start of the season and so forth. You may also get some leagues that will have maximum squad sizes because they want to make sure that, if there's 30 players pooled for a 7-a-side team, actually, they may be able to be might be able to get 2 teams out of that same pool of 30 players. However, there are a couple of different restrictions when it comes to multiple registrations for the same player. So just to highlight those, players within a league can only be registered for 1 team per age group. However, players are allowed to be registered for either for different teams within the same club, or actually they can be registered for different clubs in different age groups, but within the same league. So I could be playing for Abingdon United in the under-15s, but Abingdon Town in the under-16s. That's perfectly allowed. And it's there because not every club will be able to run teams at every single age group, and we want to give players every opportunity to play. Equally, as with adult leagues, you can register for an under-15 team in one league, and you would be allowed to register for an under-15 team in a completely different league because they're separate competitions. If you are managing a youth team, though, and you do have players across multiple teams or multiple clubs or multiple leagues, just be conscious of those maximum playing times. They're there for a reason. It is because we don't want to overtire or overexert young players. And so there are restrictions around how many minutes worth of game time a child should play within any calendar day. So we do just ask you to monitor that because you've got the responsibility to make sure that that isn't exceeded. Just going to touch quickly on international clearance. This is something which crops up every year and does cause issues. It is a lot smoother and is a lot quicker than it has been in previous years. So hopefully we're beginning to break the back of it and kind of get the message out there. But ultimately, clubs must request international clearance for any player who has previously been registered overseas, or the first time an overseas person registers with a club in England. Application for that has to be made directly to the FA. County FA, we've got no role in the process and we can't influence the FA or provide temporary approval. It's done based on agreements between National FA and National FA. However, we can kind of help you with that process and provide you copies of the forms and everything that you may need for that. Just to highlight, this applies for all players over the age of 10. Which is where it does certainly trip a few people up, that we're looking at 11-year-olds here and we have to go through that same international clearance process. And because it's based on national football associations rather than countries, it also applies to players who may be moving over from Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So although they're still part of the United Kingdom, they will previously have been governed by another national football association. And therefore, we still have to go through that international clearance process. It is frustrating. There's very little we can do about it, unfortunately. It is FIFA regulations, and I won't bore you by going into the details around it, but we was working for a national association around the time they introduced it all, and it's caused problems everywhere. It is there ultimately, though, to protect you should one of your players get to the point where, let's say they've been playing for local grassroots club in Aylesbury, move overseas to Italy, and actually suddenly they really come alive, get picked up by an international, by a professional team in Italy. If you haven't gone through that kind of international clearance process, you may not stand to get reimbursed for that player development that you would otherwise do so. The other big regulation to kind of fill you in on, which is coming and across a lot of leagues is already in place, is that from the 21-22 season, every player playing in affiliated football in England must be registered on the whole game system, and they must either have a unique email address for adult players or anybody over the age of 16. You're expected to have your own email address, or for under 16s, be linked to a parent who has a unique email address against their fan. Previously, registration was done solely by leagues, and actually as a county FA and as the National Association, there was no central database or register of players. This then led to issues where individuals would move from one club to another, one league, one county, from the north of England to the south of England, re-register as a completely new individual on the system, and thereby getting out of potentially disciplinary bans, misconduct bans, unpaid fines and so forth. By having a centralised national database where we are able to track every individual, we're able to follow that. But also we're able to make sure that an individual's records are consolidated. Looking at the people on the call, I know there's lots of club secretaries on who will have had experiences where you'll have a coach who's got DBS on one record, a playing history on another record, level 1 on another, and then they've got a safeguarding children record on a fourth. fourth fan. This system hopes to try and avoid that, because rather than relying on people knowing an obscure 3 to 8 digit numerical code as their fan record, as with everything in life these days, you just log in using your email address, and that is what we use as the unique identifier. Across the county, from a player registration point of view, I think next season there's only a couple of leagues that won't be using this or that won't be using the whole game system for their registrations. The big one in there that isn't currently using it is the East Berks Football Alliance, and we're working with them over the course of the next 12 months to import all of their data from Got Football into whole game, so that clubs don't have to go through that process of creating every single player from that league again. And then of the leagues that are currently using whole game system for registering players, again, the vast majority of them have put in that they need to have email addresses as part of that registration process. So although this is a requirement from next season onwards, some leagues have brought it in as a requirement now, and ultimately you must still make sure you meet the league registration requirements. There's a comment that anyone can get any number of email addresses, so is it actually going to prevent another players moving to another league to avoid fines? That is a fair comment. The hope is that, particularly when it comes to logging in or for qualifications, people will want to make sure that those are all still on the same record. And it is generally an easier way of tracking it, because as a club, I'm sure you will want to be registering your or wanting to have communication with your players when you sign them up. It's unlikely that people are going to go through the hassle of creating a separate email address purely for playing football. If I sign up to a club, I'm just going to use the same email address I use for pretty much everything in my personal life. So the expectation is we will still be cutting down on that potential for duplicates. And then with a bit of additional due diligence when it comes to registering new players through searching based on their personal details, we should be able to track those ones where that may have happened. I'm not going to lie, there may still be exceptions, and you may still get the ones that fall through the cracks that move from Newcastle down to Wickham and come up with a new email address, and we won't find them because there's another Paul Smith with the same birth date at the other end of the country. We won't necessarily link it to being the same person, but again, it's all trying to reduce that possibility whilst also making it a lot easier for clubs and players and coaches to access all of their information in one place. I'm going to go on to the whole game system in a second, but before I do that, I just wanted to run through what that process is for registering a player. So it looked like it just flashed up for a second. So as I said, all bar 2 or 3 of our leagues now use whole game for player registrations, and it is becoming mandatory from the start of next season now. Oh, sorry, jumped ahead too much. So the first stage will be that as the club, either the club secretary or a player registration officer, however you want to delegate that authority or responsibility within your club, but somebody will log into the club dashboard through the player registration tab and will do that initial search for a player. You search them based either on their name and date of birth, or ideally their fan and date of birth. Hopefully at some point in the future, you'll just be able to search by email address. But using some of that personal data, the system will search the database for you. If it's not on there, you'll get a prompt that you can actually use a bit of additional information, whether that's a postcode, previous club they've played for, or a couple of other fields. If you're not able to find them at that point, then by all means go ahead and create them as a new individual, because we've done that due diligence. We can't find them in the system, and it's a reasonable expectation that they are somebody new to the whole game system. Once you search for them, it will attach them to your club. Now, a player will stay attached to the club until you deliberately and manually go through and click to detach them. So you may have at this stage historic players that no longer members of the club, no longer playing, but will still show up on the whole game system. They'll stay there until you go through and manually remove them, and I'll show you how to do that shortly. But search for the player, attach them to the club, assign them to the team. At that point, you will be asked to confirm consent. Now, there's two ways of doing this. The first is if their email address is on the system, you can ask them to confirm consent electronically. And what will happen is the whole game system will just fire them an email, say, can you confirm that you agree to play for Blackwell Heath this season? The other way you can do it is by confirming offline consent. And that basically means as a club, you're saying, I have this player's consent. I have a hard copy that says they've agreed to play for me this season. And I'm just confirming that on the whole game system. You should still have that hard copy, like a manual registration form, if there is any registration dispute with the league. It's something to back up that, yes, this player said he's going to play for you this season. Once that consent's been confirmed, you can submit that registration to the league. At that point, the league will have the opportunity to either accept or reject the registration. And if there's a reason why they can't accept it automatically or immediately, hopefully they will come back, give you that explanation, and it will just sit as pending up to the point that they can approve it. And you can see which step of that process a player is on through the whole game system, and you can see where they go from every single step, from requesting consent to providing consent to submitting to the league and then being approved or rejected. And I'll show that later. A couple of issues that you may well bump into along the way, and these are where here at the county we're here to try and help you out with these. The first is if a player's ever been registered with a club who has any team at step 4 or above, it will prevent you from adding them yourselves. It's the bane of our lives, because you kind of feel that if there's an 11-year-old player that's just happened to have played previously for Aylesbury FC, why does that mean that you can't add him for your local team? That is built into the system to try to prevent clubs from signing somebody who is a professional player. If you get that, just email that player's name, date of birth or fan, if you know it, to us here at the county. At the very least, the name and which club they've previously played for, and we'll be able to add them to the club pretty much straight away. That's not a problem. We turn those around very, very quickly because we know how time-sensitive registrations are. However, unfortunately, it's a step that we have to go through because of the way the system has been built. Equally, you might get something flag up to say that the player you've searched for has multiple records. And as part of this data validation, it will ask you to contact the county FA so that we can tidy up those records. And again, we will make sure that the correct copy of the player is added to the club whilst the other records merge and consolidate. Finally, leagues will set if leagues want a photo to be uploaded, they will set a date that the photo has to have been updated after. So particularly in youth leagues where players change so much physically year on year or every couple of years, they may ask that every 2 years you upload a new photo. In those cases, if it is preventing you from doing so because there's already a photo on file, again, if you let us know at the county FA, we will remove the previous photo and get that sorted for you pretty much immediately. For any of those queries, the email address is playerregistrations@berks-bucksfa.com. And just to try and give you a little bit of context around the 1920 season, as we are now, over the course of the last 12 months, we had nearly 1,500 queries around these kinds of issues that got tagged as a player registration query. On average, we were providing a response to that within an hour and a half. We understand how time sensitive this is, particularly on a Thursday or a Friday when you're trying to get your players added ahead of the weekend. So we make sure we will prioritise that internally to turn those around as quickly as we possibly can. Thankfully, from that, we then got 99% customer satisfaction, which hopefully shows we're doing something right with prioritising it. A couple of comments that have just come up as well, just around some local league rules. And again, leagues have the opportunity to add to these registration requirements. They can't circumvent them, so they can't say from next season that you don't have to add your players on whole game system because this is an FA rule. However, they can add additional requirements. and it has just been flagged that some leagues will still ask for a hard copy registration document, or will ask for a proof of ID, particularly in youth leagues, to say that you've confirmed that the player is of the age that the parents have said. That requirement to do the ID is a club verification on it. It's not a case that you have to submit those documents to the league themselves. Under GDPR, we can't do that. However, if there is then a challenge, let's say to a player's age, the league can request specific documents just to confirm any potential registration irregularities. And if it was found that the club had ticked to say they'd done an ID check and the information that they confirmed is patently false, you could face some sanctions from the league for issues around your registration. As always, check with your local requirements as well to make sure that you meet your league requirements. Right. With that said, and hopefully it's not going to make me sign in again, but I am just going to head over onto the whole game system. You can have the side of my face if you can see me on the camera, just whilst I look at a different screen. Hopefully this view is not something that is unusual for you, but the club dashboard on the whole game system. Down the left-hand side, the tab we're going to be looking at here is just around player registration. I should say I'm relying on the fact that I've set this up and you are now able to see the whole game system. If you aren't able to, thank you, Thomas. I was going to say, tell me if it is not showing, because I want to make sure I haven't done something the wrong way around. Bear with me whilst I share the correct screen then. Okay. Hopefully it should now be showing. I can see the big red square around it, so that is hopefully correct now. So I've gone into the club dashboards across the top to select the right club, and then the player registration tab down the left-hand side. This will bring up the list of all the players that are currently registered to your club. The first thing I'm just going to flag here is you'll see in this grey box, you've got a list of different filters. So particularly for the larger clubs, if you've got a couple of hundred players registered, there's a couple, and you're looking for a specific one or a specific team's data, let's say. If you're looking for an individual, you can filter by the fan and just search for a player. So just to show you that, I start searching for myself, it brings me up. Or if you want to, how do we get back out of this? Sorry. If you want to filter it based on a specific age group or a specific team, you can then use one of these filters across the top to do so. Let me just wait for it to load back up. So let's say I now want to filter this by under 6 players within the club, come to the age filter and go to under 6 or under 7, where hopefully there is one. And this shows you we've got a demonstration, a demo player that's in that age group. So you're filtering it specifically by that requirement. Reason I wanted to draw attention to this is that those filters will remain there until you clear them. So if I now go back to the main club dashboard, fiddle around, maybe I'm just checking discipline for whatever reason, checking all the cases and so forth, and then I want to go back into player registration, it will suddenly look like all of my other players have disappeared. So if you do log in and you find that you aren't seeing all the players you're expecting to, our first bit of advice would always be just click on the clear filters button across the top, and that will remove any of those other filters that have been set and bring you back to that view with all of the players in the team across the club. Sorry. So to go through that player registration process, as I said before, if you click search for player, if you're adding somebody new, and then you can search according to those personal details. So if I search for myself, and I'm going to put the wrong date of birth in, just to show you this. If you search and you use the wrong data or the player is not currently in the system, it will flag up that there's zero contacts found in that criteria, and it will give you that opportunity to change them or to provide some additional information to try and find them. Now, I have a problem with my account at the moment, which is not always letting me search for players. So I'm going to see if this works. So one of the other errors that we've discovered cropping up over the last couple of days or the last couple of weeks, and Claire Farmer at Burfield will back me up on this, is that some accounts are getting an internal server error showing if you try and search for an individual. This is a known issue at the FA, which is affecting me, which is not helpful for the purposes of this demonstration. If you ever are in the situation where you're searching for a player, all of the information you've entered is correct, and you get that internal server error come up, again, if you send us through the list of players, we'll make sure those players get added for you. We want to make sure that this is done as smoothly as possible without adding unnecessary burden onto yourselves as volunteers. So if you are running into issues like this, drop us the information, and as I said, hopefully we'll get everything added for you within a couple of hours or so. But assuming you've been able to search for a player and get them added to the club, they will now appear in your list of players here. So the second step was to assign them to a team. To do that, you click on the square box by the side of the player, and you can do this for multiple players if you want to. You'll see that this banner's come down from the top, giving me all of the different action options. And on this instance, I've picked our demo adult female player, Lisa and Steph, and hopefully I can assign to the teams, confirm the eligibility, and it will come up automatically with the teams that player is eligible to play for. So on this instance, it's the team within the club, the demo club open-aged women team, and you just select the team you want to attach them to and add the players to that selected team. If I just go and do it for the demo adult male player, you will see it's giving me slightly more options because those are men's teams within the club. So I can at this point actually add our demo male player to multiple teams. Click that, and if I click on the drop down arrow beside the player, it will now show that he is attached to all of those different teams within the club. If you find that actually he wasn't part of the main men's team, he's just added to the different colours teams, you can remove a player from a team just by clicking the big red button, and it automatically takes them out of that team straight away. Now, as I said, there are two options for requesting consent. You can either click the request consent button. Actually, let me see. Hopefully I've got an email set up for this demo player. And it will tell you that consent has been successfully requested via email for the following players, for our adult female demo player. If I click down here, it will now show that consent is pending. So you know that you're still waiting for the player to respond to that email and confirm that they'll be playing for you next season. For the adult male player, then, I'm going to show you what it looks like if you do confirm the offline consent. By confirming offline consent, you're declaring you have signed permission from the player or their parent, if they're under 16, stating that this player wishes to play for you this season, and crucially, can provide this evidence if requested by your league. So click accept. If I drop down now on the male player, you can see that consent has been accepted offline. Once you have that consent accepted, either online or offline, you can submit that registration to the league. If you do need to do the identity check, and again, this will be based on league requirements, you just click on the green button up at the top. It will ask you to confirm what kind of ID you've seen, who completed it, and the date. Click on that. And if I go back into him, I will now be allowed to submit to the league. Again, it just gives you a bit of a check and challenge around that international clearance requirement that we covered earlier. It asks you to confirm that they've either never played outside of England, or if they have played outside of England, you've got that international clearance for them. Click submit, and all being well, if I drop down again, it will show that league registration is pending. And if you hover over it, it will tell you the league, the division, and give you the information about that submission time. Now, if I pop over into the league version of this, all being well, I'll be able to show you that from a league point of view, there is that registration is now pending, and as the league, you can go through and approve that registration or reject it as necessary. If I just approve this now, flick back over to the club, it will hopefully tell me he's fully registered. And there we go. You can see that everything's now green to confirm that, yes, that player is registered within that league. Now, as I said, you can also use these filters across the top now that we've got them in a couple of players in different teams to filter for that. So if I go into the women's team, you can see that our demo player, Lisa and Steph, have now been added to that team. Equally, if I go to the men's team, you can see that we've got a couple of players in there. I'm going to clear that filter and now show you that, again, you can see which players have had that league registration approved. Or if I wanted to, you can see which players are awaiting electronic consent from where you've requested that from them. So all of those filters will help you kind of manage the club and see the status of any player at any given time. Now, if you, as I said earlier, a player will remain attached to your club until the point that you manually go in and remove them from the club. You can only do this on players that don't have an active league registration. So if you've already had your registration submitted to the league, so BBFA demo adult male who's had his league registration accepted, it will, with any luck, tell me I can't do it. It tells me cannot be detached or removed as they have a current registration with the league. So the league must cancel that registration first before you can remove them from your club. Or you wait until the summer when there aren't any league, when all the league registrations have expired, and you can remove players at that time. So as long as you haven't submitted any, and if you've got a player that's left you over this summer, you can detach them. If you've got a player that doesn't have an active league registration, I'm going to do that through using the adult female demo player. Detach from the club. Again, ask you just to confirm that they have genuinely left the club. Hit yes, and it removes them from my list of players. We do recommend that you try and keep on top of that list of players as much as possible, just because it makes your life easier in the long run for administering the club, because you're not wading through hundreds of players that are no longer part of the club. You're not getting any notices regarding suspensions for them. It just helps you keep it a lot tidier, to be honest. If you find you have detached someone that you didn't mean to, let's say you accidentally selected multiple players, they will remain in a detached pool for 14 days. So that if you needed to, you could go back and reattach them at any point. So again, very handy, trying to keep it as easy as possible for clubs that you can manage the data yourself, but it's hopefully very intuitive to do so. As I said before as well, it will automatically select which teams the players eligible for based on their age and gender. So if I were to try and assign our youth female player who's 6 years old to a team, it will come up that there are no eligible teams to assign that player to. Again, that's just there to hopefully avoid getting to the situation where you accidentally register a player for an age group that they're not eligible for. So we're trying to help clubs avoid falling foul of some of those regulations as well by building those that check and challenge into the database and into the system. That is my whistle-stop tour of the whole game. I'm going to come back onto the presentation. Where and how, assuming questions come up, where and how can we do a 7-day transfer request via whole game if possible? So what would happen, let me pull this back up, is when you search for a player through here, if that player is already attached to a club that plays on the same day of the week or that is part of your league, when you go to attach them to your club, it will flag up and say this player already has an active registration with Abingdon Town. Please can you confirm that you provided 7 days notice of approach? to the other club. So again, it's a check and challenge, but it will still allow you to add them. If they're part of the same league, when you submit their registration to the league, it will automatically generate it as a transfer. And it will go to the league to approve or reject that transfer, as opposed to just approving or rejecting a registration. I hope that makes sense. I will also be, I will flag up at the end a bit of a resource that the FA have provided that will, like an online resource and database of queries that will help if you do have any questions around those kind of things and we're not able, or it's the weekend and we're not in the office. But generally, any questions like that, feel free to come to us and we'll try and help you out as well. So that probably takes me on quite nicely just to flag a couple of things you need to be aware of once we get into the season itself. So as I said before, where a player's current club has a team which plays on the same day of the week as any of your own teams, you must provide written notice of approach to that club secretary. Doesn't have to be anything glamorous or anything overly formal. A simple email to the current club secretary saying that you are looking to register this player. Do you have any objections? Provided that it's not the same level of football as one of their existing teams, 9 times out of 10 there's no objections to that. However, the reason that it does ask for that check and challenge is so that, let's say that club actually has a reserve team in the same league that you play in. It gives that club, as the club currently owning the registration, should we say, of that player, the opportunity to assign him or her to their reserve team, rather than risk them going off playing for another club and potentially getting injured or transferring permanently over to another club. If you do go through the 7-day notice of approach, there are effectively 2 different routes that it will take. So on day 1, you send a notice. The owning club or the current club can waive that notice, at which point you can attach the player immediately on the whole game system. You've confirmed that you've had that notice waived. If, however, you do not receive a reply to that request, you wait the 7 days where it's in amber, it's pending, you're waiting. But as soon as you hit the 8th day, you're allowed to sign that player, because you've gone through that 7-day notice period, and it's no longer on you, shall we say, the fact that they haven't written back and approved or rejected that signing or raised any concerns around that signing. There are some restrictions around this, namely that if you've approached a club about signing a player, you cannot approach that club the second time in the same season for the same player. However, you can approach another player at that club once a period of 28 days has elapsed, and you can't approach more than one player from a club at a time. What we're trying to do here is protect a club coming in and basically poaching the entire team from another club. So they're saying you can only do 1 player at a time. You only get 1 bite of the cherry for each player, and you've got to wait 28 days between contacting the club about each player, so that you can't go in and just take all of their players away in any one fell swoop. Now, one of the issues that we quite often have is that a player will leave a club whilst owing subscriptions, registrations, kit, equipment, outstanding disciplinary fees, and so forth. There is a debt recovery process that we offer for unpaid financial debts, which is an entire presentation in itself, because that's a whole load more complicated regulations. So just wanted to draw attention to the one big requirement or expectation that we have, which is that when you are signing a new player, as the signing club, it is your responsibility to be satisfied that, quote, all reasonable and financial liabilities have been discharged. Basically, you should check to make sure that the player you're signing from one club isn't leaving that club owing hundreds of pounds and 3 kits worth of equipment, because it leaves a sour taste in the mouth, to be perfectly honest. And as I'm sure it would if a player left you owing you a couple of £100 and 3 kits. So it's a plea, really, that clubs work together when they are signing players or conducting transfers or dual registrations, that you make sure that they have discharged all of those requirements. The best way I can say it is, what sounds blunt, and apologise for that, but what goes around comes around, in the sense of, if you're signing a player and he or she's prepared to leave their existing club on a moment's notice and leave them in the lurch for a couple of £100 to jump ship and go sign for you, there's got to be a little voice in your head going, well, he or she may well do the same thing to us. So if you go through that due diligence and make sure that the player is parting on good terms, particularly on good financial terms, it will help retain good relationships between clubs and kind of make sure that we're not getting into a situation where players are upping and leaving every couple of months, leaving different clubs in the lurch. Finally, when it comes to a transfer, again, as I said before, check the league rules for any deadlines and any fees. Particularly in the adult game, lots of leagues will charge transfer fees, which is entirely their prerogative. If there is an objection to the transfer, it is referred to the league management committee. However, a league isn't actually able to block a registration due to outstanding football debts, and the extension of that is that leagues aren't effectively able to block a transfer due to outstanding football debts. Again, in those situations, it's probably for the league to try and mediate the relationship between the two clubs and almost try and put pressure on the signing club not to sign a player that owes money to another club. If there's any objections around other factors, whether it's because actually it's going to potentially reduce the number of players available to the club the player's moving from, or if it's around dual registrations, again, those get referred up to the league management committee to mediate. I can see we've had a question that's popped up in the chat. If a club waives the 7-day notice, does the importing club still have to wait 28 days before making a further notice to the same club for a different player? Yes, they do. It is either 28 days from the date the notice is waived or the date the notice expires. So you must always wait those 4 weeks. That is it in terms of the presentation. I hope that's kind of covered a lot of those key regulations, those key processes on the technical side on the whole game. Thank you again for joining us. I hope you have a lovely rest of the evening, and look forward to speaking to you all soon. So thank you.